Hi, everyone, and thanks for this opportunity to speak at this online conference. And I'll just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting, but in my case, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and just to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I'll just bring up the slide deck, so just bear with me for 1 second whilst I just coordinate the screen share and everything. Great. So hopefully everyone can see that. So I'm just talking about resetting the foundations for good mental health for families post-COVID. And what I'm going to focus on today are 4 key things, just a bit of an explanation about what is called the mental health continuum, which some may or may not have heard about. Recognising the importance of self-care, both for yourself as parents and for your children and teenagers. When and how to seek help for mental health conditions, and also a little bit about parenting strategies that have been found to assist in promoting good mental health. So look, you know, anyone living in Victoria knows how tough it is. So I don't need to tell you, you know, what it's been like. 2020 has just been an extraordinary year for all of us. And, you know, there's not a day goes by that you don't see something in the newspaper about, you know, the impacts of COVID on our lives, whether that's the health impacts that we're all familiar with, the economic impacts, but also the mental health impacts. And there's been a lot of concerns raised around the impacts of COVID on our own mental health as adults, but also on our kids and teens. But what you don't hear as much about is the fact that so many children, so many teenagers, so many young people, so many parents, you know, have negotiated their way through COVID, you know, incredibly well. It's been a tough year for everyone, and it's fantastic, really, the way that people have managed to get themselves through COVID, you know, in the way that they have, but also acknowledging that, you know, for some people it's been harder than others. And of course, you know, that's where we need to get involved and assist them. So what is mental well-being? I guess we've all heard the concept mental health, but when, you know, I talk about mental health, a lot of people immediately start to associate that with conditions like depression or anxiety, which for me is about mental ill health. So perhaps another way to look at it is to talk about good mental health, which some people talk about or use the word mental well-being. Which is about feeling good emotionally and functioning well psychologically and socially, whereas mental ill health, or what some people call mental health conditions or mental disorders, are conditions that cause emotional distress and interfere with our day-to-day functioning and relationships with others. And the key thing to point out is that we all have a level of mental health, and that it varies on a continuum. And where we lie on that continuum can vary from day to day, week to week, month to month, and depend on a whole lot of factors, both our own personal factors, but also what's happening around us in our environments, in our community, in our lives. So the focus is on trying to stay at the higher end of the mental wellbeing area or continuum as much as we possibly can, using various tips and strategies that I'm about to go into. So this is a diagram that sort of represents that continuum. On the right-hand side is where we have that experience of vitality and high mental well-being, which some people call flourishing. At the other end of the spectrum, we might have multiple symptoms of severe mental health conditions, be that depression, anxiety, eating disorders, etc. And then somewhere in the middle, it's where we're doing okay, but, you know, we're under some level of stress or distress. We're managing, but not completely at our best. And another way to look at it is, you know, in this diagram, which I borrowed from Tom Mulvaney at Family Life, which says that we've all got this window of tolerance where, you know, we can cope with a range of stressors or things or, you know, challenges in our life. If maybe there's not much going on in our life, we might be too understressed and a bit bored and not really at our best. But then if we're challenged with too many things on our plate simultaneously, too many things going wrong, too much pressure that we're under, we can start to experience distress, and start to, perhaps potentially move into the territory of experiencing depression, anxiety. So we've all got this window of tolerance, which is wider and narrower depending on person to person, that we need to try to stay within. And one way to do that is through self-care. So self-care refers to the active steps, the things that we do deliberately to try to promote and protect our own mental well-being, or those of our children and teenagers, particularly during times of stress. And the tips that I'm about to talk to you about apply equally well to you as adults, as well as to children and young people. And I like to categorize those into 5 big headings: healthy behaviors, relaxation strategies, emotion regulation, fostering a helpful mindset, and building social supports. So we all know that being physically active is good for our physical health, reduces the risk of diabetes, heart disease, and cancers, but it's also now been found to be good for our mental health, and that regular physical activity can actually reduce the likelihood of experiencing depression. Likewise, maintaining a good quality diet. So low in refined and processed foods, high in fresh fruit, vegetables, legumes, etc. There's a strong link between what we eat and how we feel. And maintaining a good quality diet can actually boost and improve our mental health and well-being. Likewise, getting a good night's sleep. I mean, we all tend to try to, burn the candle at both ends and try to just, treat sleep as almost like this necessary evil in between. But we really need to have sufficient sleep, particularly children and teenagers as they're growing up need that full 7, 8, 9, possibly slightly longer hours of sleep. And that, if we don't sleep well, that can again raise our risk of depression. Reducing or avoiding alcohol and other drugs which tend to suppress our mood. But it's also about doing fun things and scheduling in some downtime and time to enjoy pleasant and relaxing activities. We can't be studying all the time. We can't be working all the time. We need to have that work-life balance. There's a range of relaxation strategies that we know can also help improve people's mental well-being. It's all about slowing down, because when we do so, we tend to suppress or dial down our flight or fight center, that part of our body, our physiology that releases stress hormones like adrenaline and noradrenaline that tend to make us feel hyped up and tense and agitated. So when we relax through deep breathing exercises or progressive muscle relaxation or yoga or Pilates, anything that reduces physical tension that works for you is important. And it's important to do it on a regular basis, not just once in a while when you're really feeling stressed out. This is all about daily rituals or weekly rituals that we need to build into our life. Connect with nature, listen to music, read a good book, or practice mindfulness meditation, which is about clearing your mind and just focusing on the here and now rather than letting your thoughts drift over to things that happened last week, last month, last year that too late, you can't change, or worrying too much about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month when it hasn't even happened yet. So staying in the moment is really important. Emotion regulation is another skill that we can learn and practice and get good at. Mental well-being, of course, is about generally feeling good, but that doesn't mean it's about feeling happy every day, all the time. That's unrealistic. Negative feelings like worry, sadness, and anger are normal in certain circumstances. For example, COVID-19. It's perfectly reasonable to be feeling stressed by, the changes of lockdown, the inability to socialize and be with family and others and friends, what's happened with homeschooling, what's happening with work. It's absolutely normal to feel that tension. But strong or prolonged negative emotions can actually be unhelpful and, interfere with our functioning and need to be managed. So one way is just to be aware, this is how I'm feeling, be able to put a name to it and acknowledge your feelings. Sitting with it. I mean, it's uncomfortable to feel sad or frustrated or worried, but sometimes it's just about accepting that feeling and it will gradually pass. Another way to do it is through problem solving, or which means either trying to deal with the problem or at least rethink the problem. So distraction, keeping busy, trying to solve the problem, or tuning into your self-talk, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and making sure that you've got a realistic mindset. Obviously, opening up and sharing, how you're feeling is also important. Really important not to bottle things up and to talk to people, share how you're feeling. We all have a need sometimes to vent, to debrief, to let other people know what's going on in our lives. And that can be really relieving of that tension. And plus, it means that people can then support us and give us advice and help us through that difficulty. And during difficult times when things aren't going well and we make mistakes or other people make mistakes around us, it's also very important to show a bit of compassion. Don't beat yourself up, don't beat others up, because it's very, very hard to be perfect in the middle of a pandemic. Um, as I said, what we think has a really strong influence on how we feel. And sometimes it's our thoughts that are misleading and make us feel things in a way that we don't need to feel. So before we jump to conclusions or start to sort of look at things the wrong way, we need to step back, think it through, maintain a bit of perspective, and avoid that ultra human tendency to always look on the negative side of things. And then when we find ourselves sort of talking to ourselves in a very negative way, to pull ourselves up and to challenge our negative self-talk. It's also important, and we try to teach this to children and young people, to have that growth mindset, that understanding that life's about trial and error and continuous improvement. You won't always get things right first time. You won't always be able to achieve what you want first go, but it's about persistence and things evolving over time. It's about something not happening yet, and it will happen, over time. But it's also not getting bogged down in the minutiae. It's very easy to get caught up in that problem, that thing that didn't go right, that situation that's not going well, and lose sight of the big picture. What's your end game? Where are you trying to head? What do you want your kids to be like? What do you want your life to be like? And that way you can keep focused on that bigger picture rather than being too caught up in small things that maybe in the bigger picture don't really mean that much. And as I said before, sometimes it really is about acceptance. We can't change COVID. It's a virus. It affects the whole planet at the moment. But also to be aware that even though things are bad now, they will get better. Who'd have thought we'd be where we are now a couple of months ago when we were getting case numbers of 750 odd? Things do have a tendency to improve over time. So rather than being a pessimist, it's okay to be a realist and sort of focus on the reality, not to be a Pollyanna. But actually, studies show that being optimistic, having that glass half full mindset, is actually something that can promote good mental health and reduce your risk of depression and anxiety. The other big thing that helps maintain our mental well-being are people around us. A sense of loneliness and lack of belonging can really be harmful to our mental health and well-being. And it's worrying and surprising how many young people are nowadays reporting a sense of loneliness and not having those friendships and relationships with people. And part of it's about opportunity and luck and ability to sort of connect, but it's also about investing time and energy to grow and deepen and maintain our friendships, relationships, and our social network. So reach out, connect regularly with friends and family, even if it's just through virtual means. It's about spending time together, sharing good experiences, each other's company, and having fun. But again, there's a lot of research to show also that it's not just our immediate circle of friends that's important. It's being part of something bigger than yourself. We see that people who volunteer, who are involved in group activities or spiritual pursuits, tend to be happier people than people who don't. So, for example, with your kids, it's important to encourage them to get involved in group pursuits, team activities, sport, where they can be part of a group and part of something bigger than themselves. I just want to briefly talk about social emotional skills, which is, one of the things we ask our schools, or we hope our schools are teaching our children and young people in the classroom, because there's a lot of evidence to show that having these programs within schools can actually benefit children both academically but also developmentally in terms of their health and mental well-being. And there's a particular website called Casal that talks about these particular competencies. And they're very, very similar to what I've just described in terms of self-care. Things like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. There are programs that can be implemented by teachers or mental health professionals working in schools to equip children with these core life skills. And they're just, from my point of view, just as important as literacy, numeracy, or any other information that kids learn through their schooling. And, you know, it's really important that schools do put some emphasis on social emotional learning. I also want to have a word briefly about broader social factors. I mean, you know, it's, even though our mental well-being is to some degree in our control and we can take those proactive steps that I've talked about, it's not entirely up to us, you know, because our mental health is impacted by what's happening around us in our home life, at school or work, in the broader community. And there are some things that are simply out of our control that do have an impact on our mental health. If we're experiencing family violence or bullying or racism, job stress or unemployment or homelessness, that's not because of us, that's because of the situation or the environment or society. And so we as a community also need to take collective action, and organisations need to do their bit to create mentally healthy environments at schools and at workplaces. And governments have got a responsibility to also put in place proper, good, healthy public policies. So what happens though, you know, if you've done all those things and through no fault of your own, yourself or your child starts to experience some mental health challenges? Well, you know, that can happen. These experiences are incredibly common. Over the course of our life, 40% of us will experience some form of mental health condition at some point in our life. And that can vary from something mild and transient to something severe and potentially ongoing. And the signs and symptoms for each of these conditions vary, but typically there's a change in the way people feel, function, or relate to others. So these changes that I'm going to talk about relate equally well to adults as to children and young people. There are physical changes. When we're anxious, we tend to feel tense and restless and fidgety. When we're depressed, we're often lacking in energy and motivation and we feel fatigue. We have trouble sleeping and there's a change in our appetite. And for young people, particularly children and teenagers, they often might report then aches and pains or physical symptoms like headaches and tummy aches, as much as they might talk about emotional changes. In fact, it's probably more common for them to experience it physically and not be able to necessarily verbalize how they're feeling. Emotionally, you know, when we're anxious, it can be persistent worry or fear, or even to the point of panic and panic attacks. With depression, it's intense or persistent emptiness or sadness, feeling blue, but also losing interest or pleasure in the things that you used to enjoy. And for some people, it's more about mood swings and mood changes. There's this constant irritability, frustration, anger, and an inability to just sort of stay in that one emotional state. When we experience mental health conditions, inevitably there's a change in how we think. You know, at a basic level, we find it hard to focus or concentrate or remember things. It's like we've got so much going on in our head and it's really hard to switch off and stay focused. We may find ourselves being constantly worried or distracted or preoccupied. And when we're anxious, we tend to catastrophize and always think about worst case scenarios and all the bad things that are going to happen. And when we're depressed, it's a pessimistic mindset. We tend to be very critical and negative in our outlook, beating ourselves up, questioning our life, questioning our future. And in some instances, we might get to the point of thinking that life is not worth living anymore. Behaviour, as I said, there's a drop in motivation and drive. We just can't do things the way we used to be able to do it. Our productivity drops off, our performance drops off, whether that's in study or work or at home in our relationships. And we may become socially withdrawn, cut ourselves off from others, or we're just always there's a high level of friction and conflict, and we seem to be in frequent arguments with others. So some people smoke or drink to cope, and other people take drugs to try to escape or feel better. But that's obviously counterproductive. It might relax you in the short term, but do more harm in the long term. And tragically, some people will self-harm as a way of releasing that tension, that distress that they're feeling. So, what's important to understand is it's okay to not feel okay. This can happen to anyone. It's no one's fault and no one's to blame. It is just one of those things that can happen to humans. And so, we really encourage people not to bottle things up, not to feel ashamed or embarrassed about what's going on, not to worry, that they've done something wrong as a parent if their child or teenager is experiencing these difficulties. They're no one's fault. And so it's important to talk to people you trust and tell them how you're feeling and express your concerns. And it's really important, and men are probably the worst at this, waiting until they hit rock bottom or they're in a crisis before they seek advice or express how they're feeling to loved ones. The mental health service system isn't perfect. I'm not going to pretend it is, but there is support and assistance out there for people who need it. And, here's just a sort of a list of the sorts of, things that people can turn to. There's so many websites now with basic information, but also treatment programs, things that you can do yourself to treat depression, and programs for your kids as well around anxiety and depression as well. Telephone helplines like Lifeline and Beyond Blue, Kids Helpline. Headspace has got telephone support, email, and web chat support. There's also online forums that people can share how they're feeling and get tips and strategies from people going through the same thing that you might be going through, and sharing and supporting each other's. Nowadays, and increasingly with the support of the Victorian government, there's more mental health professionals in schools, but you can also access the mainstream services like Headspace, CAMS and KIMS around Victoria, or private mental health professionals, GPs, psychologists, social workers. And there's been a recent increase in the availability of Medicare counselling sessions and telehealth. So I really encourage people, if you're feeling that way, to not feel alone, not feel embarrassed, not feel you've done the wrong thing as a parent, but to understand that these things happen and help is at hand. I want to just finish with some general high-level information about parenting strategies, and not trying to teach anyone, about this. But, it's true that parents and caregivers do lay the foundations for their children's mental health and well-being, but they are certainly not to blame for mental health conditions. There's so many variables that go into it, including genetic situations, things that happen outside of parents' control in a child's life at school or a young person at work. And so, it's really about trying to, do your bit, but not necessarily feel that you can do it all or that it's all up to you. You all know this. I'm just, telling you what you already know. There's no one single right way to raise a child, but there are a range of strategies or approaches that most parents, most parenting professionals and the research suggests can help children develop into healthy and happy people. And there's also certain things that are probably important to avoid. So, some of this, most of this is common sense. Children and young people benefit from love and emotional warmth, regular communication and interaction, having their parents and family members interested in them, guiding them, being involved in their life, but also giving them a chance to do things on their own. So progressively from childhood to adolescence, it's increasing the level of autonomy and giving kids a chance to learn, have a go, do things wrong, correct it, get better. It's also about setting boundaries and having consistent and fair rules and discipline, and creating this family climate, this atmosphere that feels safe, it's supportive, and it's low conflict. So the two big foci are parenting style and the overall family climate. And in terms of parenting style, it's this sort of Goldilocks zone of not too harsh, not too permissive, somewhere in the middle that's just right. Being an adult, not necessarily a friend, but also being close to your child. So high levels of parental warmth and support, involvement, but letting go, letting kids learn and do things and fail if they need to, and supporting them through it. And avoiding harsh or authoritarian parenting with inconsistent discipline, too much conflict in the home, or being maybe too hands-on, being overprotective or controlling, or being critical or lacking that sort of warmth. So, and in the home, it's about everyone, the siblings and family and extended family, good communication, showing affection, appreciation, respect, cooperation, doing things together, eating meals together, spending time together, and encouraging connection with uncles and aunts and grandparents and extended family, and again, minimizing that conflict in the home, because we know that children who experience overly stressful family environments can develop changes in their immune system and stress hormone system and in their brain, in their biology, that can seriously compromise their psychological and social development. I won't go through these things, but there are so many websites nowadays that give you these top 10 tips for parenting. They're just guidelines. They're just sort of general principles that will help you, but you have to sort of learn your way of parenting and put them into action the way that works for you and the way that suits your child. Every child's different. So it's really about finding the style that fits your particular child's temperament and personality. And look, I will refer to these parenting programs that are out there. They, for some reason, they do carry a lot of stigma. People feel uncomfortable about accessing these programs, as if to access them is a reflection on you, that you don't know enough about how to be a good parent, or, you're doing something wrong and you need to learn to do something right. That's entirely not the case. These are just tips and strategies that are beneficial for any and every parent. And, these programs have been designed for every parent, not just parents who may be experiencing issues or challenges with their child's development. Triple P has been around for ages. It's one of the most evidence-based parenting programs available, and it's being offered free of charge by the Victorian government at the moment. Partners in Parenting is a program that we're involved with our colleague, Associate Professor Marie Yap from Monash University. And Tuning Into Kids and Tuning Into Teens is offered by the University of Melbourne. They're online, they're face-to-face, and most of them are free. And there's also a range of wonderful websites. I really can't go past raisingchildren.net.au, Parent Line here in Victoria, a telephone support service for parents who need some support, and reachout.com, which was originally created for teenagers, now offers a lot of fantastic information for parents as well. And the Victorian and the Commonwealth Government also have their own websites that contain information about young people's mental health and wellbeing. So I draw your attention to that. And I might finish there to give some time for question and answer. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. I hope everyone can hear me. Maybe a show of hands and a bit of a wave would be really helpful from everybody.
Got you, Gail.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alan. Well, Steve, that was terrific. I mean, it was just such a extensive coverage, and we're getting lots of beautiful comments and feedback how wonderful that information was, and the great coverage you gave. And yes, Steve's a very giving person. He's a great contributor, and I'm sure he'll give us those slides to post to our website. So that'll be great. Couple of questions, Steve. I'm just going to go to the first one, and it's from Lisa. And she would like to know her comment. I'll just lead into her question. It will be really important moving forward out of COVID is the recognition of COVID-related stress in children, as distinct from children who already had the pre-existing trauma and anxiety. How will teachers differentiate between the two groups, because their needs will be different?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's true. The fact is that we're dealing with a heterogeneous group or a mixed group. Absolutely, there will be some children and young people that, for the very first time, have started to experience difficulties, as a result of all the changes in their life brought by COVID, and to some degree, as I said before, some of those experiences are normal. We would expect kids to feel, the changes from not being able to socialize with their friends, pursue their sort of sport, and all the changes that they've been under. So I think teachers are being prepared for that, and I know the education department is on top of that, and understanding that children's emotional well-being needs to be at the priority, at the top of the pecking order as kids return to schools. And they're going to have to spend some time, supporting kids and finding out where they're at. Are they okay? Are they sort of in that stress but managing, or have they started to experience more significant mental health difficulties? And there's a range of resources that are available to teachers as well as parents around trying to identify those warning signs, those telltale signs. So, some kids may have regressed over this period, and the teachers will notice a change from what they were like in term one, or they just will struggle to get into the rhythm of the school life again, and that's another telltale sign. Or they just won't be at the, everyone slipped back a little bit, but it's about how far. And I guess, teachers, can access a program that's been developed by Beyond Blue called BU, and there are various templates there, checklists that they can use to try to assess where a young person's at. And then people who may have already come into COVID with a mental health condition which has been exacerbated, I think they're obviously, again, another priority group, and they might need more specific strategies and one-to-one plans developed by teachers and the wellbeing teams at schools to support them, because their needs, as the questioner said, may be different from the newer instances of anxiety or depression that might have evolved over this past, 3 to 4 months, or longer, 2 terms that we've been sort of in remote learning and lockdown.
Yeah, Steve, I think the question, Lisa also just elaborated a bit more in detail about that just the differentiation between the stress between COVID and versus, stress from a trauma such as abuse or long-term trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, that's the other worrying thing. We know that some kids have been exposed to traumas over the intervening period, because of the changes in their family circumstances. We've seen reports of a rise in domestic violence, and that is going to impact kids, in a significant way. And so I think our teachers, as I said, have been primed to start to look for this, or they need to be primed to start to look out for this, and really be sensitive to and on the lookout for kids that may appear to be struggling, and to wonder and ask and why, and try to work with their families. As I said, some of it is just about resettling people into a normal routine and things will come good. But for some, it's going to need more than that. And they're the children and young people teachers need to spot, and then work with families and potentially mental health professionals to support.
Steve, the next question actually was a comment by Jenny just in relation to pre-service teachers, and what sort of your sort of any commentary or response to about training, particularly now with the focus being on student wellbeing and mental health. What could be done in that area from your perspective? Do you feel that there is things starting to happen in that component?
Yes, look, to a degree. I go back to the Commonwealth program, Commonwealth funded program, which Beyond Blue have carried on BU. And so they're working with Early Childhood Australia and Headspace, to support, student or child and adolescent mental health and wellbeing. And there's another program being managed by Emerging Minds that's sort of training up, people working with children and young people. So education, health professionals, mental health professionals. So now the BU program is also targeted to pre-service teachers. Now, the extent to which that's permeated into their training, I'm not 100% sure about, but it's certainly one of the objectives and one of the requirements of that funding, to try to, have teachers as ready as possible for when they hit the classroom to understand about child and adolescent development and mental health and wellbeing, and be in a position to play their role, to support good mental health and pick up the early signs and symptoms of kids in distress or needing that extra little bit of attention. So to what degree it's happening, I'm not 100% sure, but I know it's meant to be one of the priorities that BU focuses on.
Thanks, Steve. Next question comes from Genevieve. How do you deal with the conflict between schools' expectations for young people and what the parents are noticing at home and are trying to share?
Look, I think that's a broad question. I mean, I think it's, it's a partnership situation, and I think schools that do well have got that open communication channels, but they've also structured in ways for parents to sort of be involved and shape, what happens. I think again, that's probably one of the things that family school partnerships area is one of the areas that probably needs continued improvement. And I'm sure, Gail, you'd support that's an area that some schools do better than others, and everyone does a bit, and primary schools maybe do it better than secondary schools. But, it's an area that's probably still not quite right. And I think it's that situation where, to some degree, I think, the government and society's emphasis is on catching kids up so that they don't, it doesn't impact their education achievement and their career. But I think, for parents, it's about getting kids back with their friends and in a routine and feeling safe and supported, and then learning will flow from there. So it's all about communication. I mean, I know that sounds very glib, and but parents need that opportunity to share with teachers, and teachers need to listen, hear what parents have to say. But by the same token, it is about that whole of class approach, and they're going to need to provide what they can for each individual student, but within the context of the classroom as a whole and the school as a whole. That's probably sitting on the fence, isn't it?
No, that's okay, Steve. It's a great lead in, because we're big on relationship-based education at Parents Victoria, and for people that don't know, we really encourage you to go to our website and click on our RBE tile on our website and have a read of the wonderful booklet that we launched last year with John Hendry. And I wanted just to remind all our guests here today that we are working tirelessly behind the scenes, building our resource platform in that regard. And we've got schools, and a couple of those schools are actually represented here today, which is wonderful, that are onboarding in the RBE project. And it is all about relationships and how we manage that. And Steve, you covered a number of those topics in your presentation around emotional regulation, what happens when we all make mistakes, and that's not just the children, it's the adults as well, and it's just not parents, it can be teachers as well. So it's all of us, how we work together and how we trust each other going forward, and how we there's so much work to be done in that space, because when none of us are perfect, and we've seen that through this whole pandemic. So thank you for that. There was a comment from Nola, and I thought that was another one to mention, because she certainly identified that the coverage was so good, and she also agreed in particular about those trauma experiences that Lisa and Jenny pointed out around pre-existing trauma and mental health training, and how we need to reduce the stigma and marginalisation of even primary age students because of the lack of understanding and empathy. She was pleased to see the minister was saying they were going to be pushing some more, obviously, investment into that space. So it's a bit of a wait and see, but I want our guests to be confident that Parents Victoria will be keeping a very close watch on that as everything moves forward.
And I think it is about that, as I said, there's stuff that, you can do for yourself, but for your children and teenagers, but we rely on organisations, institutions like schools and like governments to also play their role. We can only do so much, and we need, that backup. And there's a lot of evidence that a whole of school approach to mental well-being, which looks at various factors like the overall school climate, the way what's taught and how it's taught, and also those partnerships and relationships with parents first and foremost, but then also with support services outside the school. It's really important, and that model needs to now be part of all schools, and it is what the education department and encourages schools. But, some would say they just don't have the resources, and that's a problem for government to address. Teachers need the time to be able to build those things into the school. But, I think I reflect on, my daughter, who's a primary school teacher, and I just look at what she does and I think, just do that, because it's just about that relationship she forges with her children and with their parents. And there's no right or wrong, and every kid's different, and you just have to try to, work together for the benefit of the young person as much as you possibly can. And I know, Vic serves SRCs on this, but also, hear what the student has to say, hear what the young person has to say, bring them into the conversation, the equation as well. So it is that partnership between student, parent, teacher, and the overarching school environment.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Just a couple more things before we finish up with you. Raylene is actually, certainly she's acknowledged the concern, the pressure on teachers on the catching up of the academic of students, because, and I just sort of probably at that point clarify the department are being very clear to all our Victorian government schools in relation about mental health and wellbeing will be the priority, and transition is a priority, and catch up is a priority. So, but of course it's striking the balance and about everybody doing the communications effectively with the families about those priorities. But I also think that schools and families are also mindful. We've had some questions even in the conference today about, if you do need to seek help or things are happening, what do we do? How do we approach the school? Because some families are very reluctant to reach out to the school, knowing the schools are really under, being slammed at the moment. And so there's always nice ways of how you can do that. And we would always say, just do it respectfully. If you don't get a sort of response in the first couple of days to a phone call or an email, we'll then sort of follow up with a gentle reminder and just say, look, if it's not the right time now, when would be the appropriate time to make a time to have a chat? So it's all those sort of little tips that, and certainly at Parents Victoria, we'll make sure our website has lots of information. But Steve, before we finish up, maybe it would be just timely to mention, because obviously your organisation, Prevention United, invited Parents Victoria to be on an advisory group with others regarding the PIP program. Do you want to just mention that briefly before we finish?
Yeah, and thanks, Gal. And look, yeah, this is a program that was put together by Associate Professor Marie Yap from Monash University, and she's been working on the development of this program for many years and gone through a lot of consultation with parents and with sort of professionals working with parents to come up with this interactive online program that's available through our website. It's called Partners in Parenting, and basically it's free of charge and it's available right now. You can log on to our website. It's designed for parents with a teenager between the ages of 12 and 17 years of age, and it's to try to empower, equip parents with those strategies that are drawn from that work that Marie's done, to parent in a way that's going to reduce the likelihood that your teenager might experience depression and anxiety. And the research shows it works, and the testimonials from parents show that they found it easy to use and very helpful. So it's available at the moment on our website, Partners in Parenting, but just go to preventionunited.org.au and look under parenting programs. And but I'll also give a shout out to DHHS, who has made Triple P available free of charge to parents right across Victoria as well. It's just like anything. We can always learn new strategies, new tips. Do things a little bit better. We've got the core skills as parents, as humans around self-care, but it's always good to add a few more strings to the bow, a few more skills to the repertoire. And that's all it is. It's an online learning program to give you a few hints. Some of it might be very familiar to you. Some of it might be new, and then hopefully that equips you to do your what you want to do. Help your kids grow up to be healthy and happy. So I'm happy to encourage people to use that program.